Welcome to our final plenary session of AJC's Global Forum 2022. In just under 2 days, we've already done so much together. We have advocated with distinguished diplomats, discussed critical topics with experts, and honored AJC CEO David Harris in yesterday's truly spectacular tribute. While our program is coming to a close, this jam-packed session has some of the most important and timely content yet. We will examine many of the American Jewish community's most pressing questions and look toward the future. As we enter a transformative period of AJC, this morning's first guest is a person I know is very much on all of our minds. Incoming AJC CEO Ted Deutch. Currently serving as a member of Congress, Ted has been a close friend and partner of AJC for years, championing issues of concern to AJC and to the broader Jewish community, including combating anti-Semitism, supporting the US-Israel relationship, countering the threats posed by Iran, and defending democratic values. His demonstrated passion for AJC's core issues, extensive foreign policy experience, deep relationships with political leaders and diplomats around the world, fidelity to fundamental principles, and long-standing ties with AJC make him a natural fit to carry on the vital work of our organization, building on David Harris's extraordinary legacy. While Ted will not formally assume the role of CEO of AJC until October 1st, we're delighted to have him with us here today for the opportunity to get to know him a bit better and to hear some of his initial thoughts for the future. Ted will be in conversation with Abby Pogrebin, journalist and author, and another dear friend of AJC. Welcome, Ted and Abby. Thanks, Ted.
Very much.
Thanks, Abby. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Congressman Deutch, CEO Deutch.
Nice to be with you. Nice to be with everybody.
Am I allowed to call you Ted just for now, just for official?
Always, always. It's true for you. It's true for everyone in the room.
Thank you. And thank you for the introduction. It's so wonderful to be here, to be part of the AJC family. Let's just dive right in with this moment. It's quite a career change. Why did you decide to take this job?
It's an excellent question. I'm not sure why everyone's laughing. Look, this is this position, this job, this organization. This is who I am. Everything that I've done in my life is motivated by my Judaism, and it's what I'm most passionate about. It's what drove me to be involved in the community as a lay leader. It's what made me, as a state senator, figure out a way to confront Iran from Tallahassee, Florida, something that doesn't happen that often. And it's guided everything I do in Congress, from tackling anti-Semitism to chairing the Middle East and North Africa subcommittee, to finding ways to have my Jewish values infused in all I do. And the last thing is, I want to go back to what my friend Foreign Minister Lapid said yesterday about our family. And most important to me is that this is my family. I will say, however, that as Foreign Minister said, we love our family more, and I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge my wife Jill and daughter Gabby, who are here, and my kids Cole and Serena, who are watching, because I love them most of all. But thanks for the opportunity.
And Jill has quite a Jewish resume of her own, so she'll be another AJC interview at some point. I hope to grill her.
I'm so proud of my wife and kids and all of their involvement in the Jewish community, and can't wait for everyone to get to know them as well.
But I want to stick with the personal, because you have always worn this not just on your sleeve, very unapologetically, very publicly, and particularly in a moment when not a lot of people are doing that in public life. Just if we can go back to your Jewish bio a little bit.
Sure.
I want to start with Camp Ramah in the Poconos. No, we only have 15 minutes, actually only 12 and a half, so we're not going to be able to do Camp. But I do, but I asked. That's
why I came out today.
He actually did a whole podcast on Camp Ramah. I suggest you find it. But it is, I'm obviously joking and not joking. This is something that you've lived a long time. It's in your DNA. Can you just give us a little bit sense of how you grew up, and particularly your father's history?
Sure. I grew up, I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in a small Jewish community. And I was one of a very small handful of Jews in my high school. I was the pro-Israel community in my high school. I was the Jewish community in my high school. I fought anti-Semitism. I was the anti-Semitism fighting committee in my high school. And it's something I take real responsibility for. But I'm the youngest of 5, and my parents were older than most of my colleagues. My dad graduated from high school, enlisted in the army, and went off to fight the Nazis in the Battle of the Bulge, and earned a Purple Heart when a piece of shrapnel went through his helmet. And my dad always told me, especially my siblings had all moved out of the house by the time I was 6. So I spent a lot of time with my father, who always wanted me to know that we are Jews and we are Americans, and we should be proud of both and never take either for granted. And that's what guides me still.
In 2019, a Washington Post columnist wrote a story that began with this sentence: "Moral clarity is a rare commodity in Washington." She was actually talking about the discussion about singling out anti-Semitism as a focus in a congressional resolution. But I want to go to more recent moment, 2021. You addressed the House floor in the debate about continued funding for Israel's Iron Dome defense system. And I'd like to play a clip, it's only 2 minutes, of your speech on the floor because it was so powerful and memorable, and then ask you about it.
Sure.
I thank my friend, Chair DeLore, and I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a speech about how important it is for us to stand up against terror and the terror strikes against Israel launched by the terrorist group Hamas from Gaza. 4,500 rockets that Iron Dome helped us stop. And I have a speech that's all about how important it is for us to replenish that. But, Mr. Speaker, I cannot allow one of my colleagues to stand on the floor of the House of Representatives and label the Jewish democratic state of Israel an apartheid state. I reject it. Today, this caucus, this body, the House of Representatives will overwhelmingly stand with our ally, the state of Israel, in replenishing this defensive system. If you believe in human rights, if you believe in saving lives, Israeli lives and Palestinian lives, I say to my colleague who just besmirched our ally, then you will support this legislation. May I have 15 more seconds?
You're the gentleman 15 seconds. You're the gentleman 30 seconds.
Is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, we can have an opportunity to debate lots of issues on the House floor, but to falsely characterize the state of Israel is consistent with those, let's be clear, it's consistent with those who advocate for the dismantling of the one Jewish state in the world. And when there is no place on the map for one Jewish state, that's anti-Semitism. And I reject that. I stand in support of this important legislation. I thank the Speaker, the Majority Leader, the Chairwoman for bringing this forward, and I urge every one of my colleagues to stand with us and support it. I yield back.
Thanks.
So it is not a given. It is actually not obvious these days to take on one's fellow members of Congress so publicly, particularly in one's own party.
Yeah.
Can you address that moment and particularly some of what you are seeing in Congress right now in terms of the strains when it comes to Israel?
Sure. Look, the thing that the reason we're together here is because we understand the threats facing the community now. We understand the rise of anti-Semitism on the far right. We understand the rise of anti-Semitism on the far left. And we understand the need to confront it. But that requires boldly speaking out and standing up and not backing down. And in this case, that meant that after one of my colleagues came to the House floor to attack Israel, label it an apartheid state in a completely over the top and, as I said, just unacceptable attack on our ally, it required a response. And you don't always have the opportunity to stop and think and plan and figure out the right way to respond. There are moments where timing is everything. And at that moment, if I didn't do that, then the last voice of the Democratic Party before we voted on Iron Dome funding would have been one that labeled Israel an apartheid state. So I waited until the end to have the opportunity to respond. And what everyone needs to understand is the response from my colleagues was incredible. The people who were so grateful because they don't want to be associated with the far left anti-Israel views because they stand with Israel. We have an obligation to lead, and when we lead, others will see it, they'll hear it, they'll internalize it, and it will empower them to do the same.
I think what you describe in their welcoming that opportunity that you, in a way, gave them that bulwark to stand strong is harder for those who I would say are under 30. I know that's a generalization, but we're both seeing it. We have kids in their 20s. It's a constant conversation at AJC. It's gotten harder, I think, than it ever has in my lifetime to, as you say, stand up, and particularly with the pressures that are virulent on social media, particularly in May 2021. You know the challenges. When it comes to the number of young people, and I know AJC has done its own research on this, that are feeling the need to hide their Jewishness. It's not that they don't feel Jewish pride, but they're saying, in the scheme of things, this is not just a headache that's mundane. This is not going to be worth the fight. I'm going to be essentially ostracized, canceled, attacked. How, when you think about your role at AJC, can you navigate some of these pressures now when it comes to young people?
It's a really important, arguably the most important question there is, which is what about the next generation? And I would answer it two ways. First, just with respect to anti-Semitism and advocacy, you have to make sure that young people are prepared to be the advocates that they can be. The number of people who are afraid to speak up is also a function of people who aren't comfortable. But so many of them want to, and AJC, through the LIFT program, the Leaders for Tomorrow program, trains advocates in high school to be ready to go to a college campus and take this on. And I think the opportunity is to build on that and to create this whole cohort of leaders who will shape the debate as it takes place on college campuses is enormous. That's one piece. But the other piece that we don't spend enough time talking about is the fact that too often we're engaged in this battle on the terms that the anti-Israel crowd wants to engage in, instead of focusing on where we are now in the world. And every time is a good opportunity to acknowledge the incredible leadership of David Harris, but this is a particularly good time because what AJC has done under David's leadership, with the incredible staff that it has, helped to set the stage for, among other things, the Abraham Accords. And the circle of peace for Israel is growing. And the number of countries in the world who want to be a part of that, who want to tackle climate change by using Israeli technology, who want to address food insecurity by using Israeli expertise, who understand what Israel brings to the table, that's getting bigger and bigger. We should be telling, we do and need to even more, be telling the story, and our young people should feel comfortable telling it, that there is a very positive story for Israel happening right now. The world sees it, we see it, and we need to make sure that we're sharing that with everyone else.
You, just to switch, and I know it's a little bit abrupt to the international stage, but you've raised it with the Abraham Accords. I just want to go touch on when you chaired the Congressional Study Group on Germany, and you used a meeting with Chancellor Merkel to advocate for survivors. Can you talk about that for a second?
Oh, sure. So I chair the Congressional Study Group on Germany, which is always very peculiar to people. Deutsch, by the way, no German blood anywhere in my family, just to be clear. I know what you're all thinking. I was asked to chair it by a Republican colleague of mine who thought I would be a good partner. I said yes because I knew that eventually I would have the opportunity to sit with Chancellor Merkel. And that opportunity came, and a delegation sat across from the chancellor, and I spoke last, and one after one, they raised all the issues that one would expect: trade, the importance of the transatlantic relationship, migration, there were refugee issues, brought them all up. When it was my turn, I turned to the chancellor and I told her that I represent a community in South Florida with one of the largest populations of Holocaust survivors. And it was a moment where Claims Conference was negotiating, and I explained to her that this was the last opportunity that we had to help ensure survivors could live out their lives in dignity, and I implored her to do more to help. And she looked at me and said, "Congressman, I just returned from the anniversary of the liberation of Dachau." And she said, "You must know the special responsibility that I feel when I shake the hand of a survivor, or when I hold the hand of a survivor or shake the hand of a liberator." And she went on to advocate strongly for more. And again, why do I want to do this job? The relationship that AJC has built over the years, that David has built over the years in Europe, in Germany, forging those close ties that allow those kinds of conversations to happen every day, not just on the occasional congressional delegation. That's what's so special about this.
So unfortunately, yes. We're almost out of time, but the last question, you are obviously very accomplished, and congratulations on your career so far. But
thanks. Again, I don't know why that's a funny line, but go ahead.
But there has to be some spilkis about filling the shoes of David Harris. And as you look ahead,
that's the laughter. I understand. I'm putting it all together.
As you look ahead at this incredible menu of priorities and challenges, just what excites you, what energizes you, I should say, about the work that lies ahead for you at AJC?
Look, I'm leaving a place that is, suffice to say, not the best functioning institution in the world at the moment, where there's great vitriol and members attacking members and partisanship, and it's really challenging. And by the way, I was expecting to continue on in that work, but then this opportunity came along to be in a place where there's this remarkable group of lay leaders and activists who all want the same thing, which is to work together to strengthen the Jewish community and advance Israel's place in the world and defend democratic values, and to have the opportunity to work with those lay leaders and a group of dedicated professionals who spend every day giving their all to this cause, and knowing that I'm stepping in. Yes, I fully acknowledge, I don't know where David is. The shoes are enormous. I can't try to fill David's shoes, but I can absolutely acknowledge it's because of David's leadership over these years that everything I've described about this organization is so set for further growth and success and the opportunity for all of us to build together a brighter future for the Jewish community in the world.
Thank you, Congressman Ted Deutch. Thank you to all of you. Enjoy the day, and thank you, AJC.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
I think that, being Jewish is the part of my identity that I'm most proud of.
This is my family's history. This is the central piece of my own identity, and it gives me purpose and meaning in life.
I think that being Jewish and being proud are synonyms.
The best way that I can be a Jew and embody to me the values of Judaism is to be proud of it and to never let anyone take that away from me.
There is such strength in visibility.
Every cell in my body is Jewish. I love our resilience. I love our faith. I love the contributions that we've made to the world.
I think it brings me a lot of great values, and it brings a lot of our community great values. It brings me a lot of meaning in my life.
I want to continue what my ancestors fought for. They gave up everything so that they can come to America and allow me to be who I am today.
We're going to stand here and we're going to be proudly Jewish, and we're going to support the state of Israel, and we're going to make sure that future generations of Jews have a safer and more secure world.
We're not going anywhere. We're here. We've been here for thousands of years, and we're going to continue to believe in what we believe.
Judaism strives to create a better world, and I'm really proud to be part of that.
I think every Jew must attach the word proud to the word Jewish in their identity.
It doesn't have to be a giant march. It doesn't have to be a big social media change. It can just be you and me saying, here I am, and I'm proud to be Jewish.
There's a new task force, and it's taking a stand at IU Bloomington after a rise in anti-Semitic acts targeting students who are on campus.
IU Hillel formed a task force to combat anti-Semitism. It includes the Mezuzah Project.
We're offering non-Jewish students a mezuzah case that says, I stand with my Jewish friends.
We want to come out and make a big statement that we have allies, that there's people here that are supporting us, and that we care about our Judaism, and we want to make a statement about it too.
As a non-Jewish member of the task force, I've really benefited from learning more about Judaism and how to be a better ally to my Jewish friends and fellow students.
Russian President Vladimir Putin invading the sovereign country of Ukraine.
Tonight, a worsening humanitarian catastrophe in Kharkiv.
Mr. Zelensky says that the heavy bombardment amounts to a war crime.
And added to mounting evidence that Putin's war has put civilians in the crosshairs.
My name is Yulia Pototskaya. I am director of Kharkiv Hillel. I am in France now. I want to come back home to rebuild war-torn Kharkiv Hillel.
My name is Olena Khaneva, and I am in Czech Republic now. I'm counting days until I can come back to my home in Hillel Kharkiv to create, to inspire, to hug my friends, to have Shabbat dinner together, and to live my normal life again.
My name is Allison Green, and I'm honored to be here to present this year's Sharon Green Award for Campus Advocacy in honor of my mother. Sharon Green was strong, compassionate, and lived her life advocating for and helping others through her social work, community service, and Jewish values. By example, she taught my siblings and me to rise up against injustice, bolster those who need a voice, and to be kind. As that powerful video just showed, this year's award recipients embody Sharon's spirit and are truly deserving of this honor. The Sharon Green Award for Campus Advocacy, created in 2017, recognizes student leaders and campus organizations that effectively and creatively combat anti-Semitism, stand up for Israel, and promote Jewish life on campus. Publicly identifying as Jewish, and particularly as a Zionist, on college campuses in 2022 is not always easy. Over the past several years, we have witnessed Jewish students being intimidated and ostracized purely because of who they are and what they believe. But despite the challenges, so many Jewish student leaders have risen above the fray, modeling the kind of compassion and dignity that's sorely needed in our society today. The leadership of our first recipient of this year's Sharon Green Award, Indiana University Hillel, has done just that. Not only did IU Hillel devise a powerful and innovative way for Jewish students to push back against anti-Semitism through their Red Mezuzah campaign, but they also enlisted the help and solidarity of their non-Jewish peers, creating a movement that will benefit the entire IU community in the years to come. While I had no role in the selection process, it is a special privilege for me to deliver this honor to IU Hillel because I'm a faculty member at Indiana University. Though my affiliation with IU is purely coincidental to Hillel's receiving this award, it gives me such great pleasure to work at a university with incredible student leaders engaged in such meaningful activism. As you saw in the video, the leaders of our second award recipient, Hillels of Ukraine, are facing a much different challenge. Their amazing strength in face of a brutal war of aggression by Russia and in the aftermath of the death of one of their own should serve as an inspiration to us all. We hope and pray that they will be able to return to their physical and spiritual home at the Hillel in Kharkiv very soon. And in addition to receiving the Sharon Green Award, Hillels of Ukraine are the recipient of a grant from AJC's Stand With Ukraine Fund, which has raised over $2.4 million to support the Ukrainian people at this very difficult time. Although our recipients from Hillels of Ukraine could not be with us today, we will hear from them via video message in just a few minutes. Our hearts are with them, their families, and the people of Ukraine. At this time, please join me in welcoming Kaylee Werner and Zach Holozinski of the IU Hillel Anti-Semitism Prevention Task Force to the stage to receive the first of this year's Sharon Green Awards. Congratulations. We applaud the creativity and determination that you have displayed, and on behalf of the Green family and AJC, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
We are beyond grateful to both Bill and Susan Green for continuing the memory of Sharon and allowing us to use our voices in a climate that has repeatedly tried to silence and quash Jewish students on campus. We know that the most important thing we can do as students is stay steadfast in our belief that Jewish students should not be targeted simply for being proud of our history and heritage. Leaders like Sharon, Bill, and Susan prove to us that our voices matter, that they are powerful, and that a difference can and will be made with enough persistence and perseverance. We strive to make it clear that Jewish students have a home not only at Indiana University, but at campuses across the country and the world. Whether we face BDS marches, vitriolic language, or just plain and simple violence, we know that the work we have done and continue to do will make a difference. We would also like to make a special note and thank Jill and Ron Sedley for their continued support and incredible contributions to Indiana Hillel. They will impact Hillel for years to come. Thank you.
As many of you know, beginning in the fall of 2021, our college campus was struck by the same plague that was spreading around the country, anti-Semitism. Mezuzahs were torn off of doors, Nazi symbols were painted around campus, online attacks were aimed at Greek life Jewish students. Sadly, the list goes on. I found myself wondering, why all of a sudden did the campus that had originally wowed me with its commitment to diversity and inclusion not feel safe anymore? In order to keep our campus, our home, safe, we, along with other dedicated, passionate Jewish students, have taken a number of actions this year. We have shared over 500 mezuzahs around campus. We hung a large mezuzah in the center of our student union. We met with our campus president. We tabled. We passed campus-wide legislation to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and we have much more planned for next year. To date, we have spread our message to over 25,000 students across campus. None of this would have been possible without the support of the greater Jewish community, and of course, the Green family. I am eternally grateful to AJC for helping us to know that we have unwavering support in our mission to make college campuses feel like a safe space for Jewish students. Thank you.
Now please turn your attention to the video screens as Osik Axelrod, the Director of Hillels of Central Asia and Southeastern Europe, Lucia Firsanova, the Program Director of Hillel Kyiv, and Olena Kilina, Event Manager of Hillel Kharkiv, accept this award.
Dear friends, let me start from my deep, deep gratitude to Green family for this very important for us award. You know, I'm the head of Hillel case. Hillel case, it's one of the biggest, by the way, Hillel in the world. Hillel case, it's Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. But now we are talking about Hillel in Ukraine. You know that at the beginning of the war, Kharkiv Hillel, one of the biggest Hillel in our region, after rocket attack was absolutely destroyed. And I have a commitment. I said that the first task after the war that Hillel case should fulfill to rebuild Kharkiv Hillel. And you know, we have a lot of friends and partners all over the world. And I'm sure, we hope, for their help, for their support, for their partnership. And again, thank you very, very much to Green family. Thank you very, very much to AJC for this award. We appreciate this. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Elena and I am a student of Hillel Kharkiv. I'm saying it in the present tense because once I became a Hillel student, I will feel like that forever, even though my home Hillel office is totally ruined. We are so proud of our students who volunteer, who stay in Kharkiv or help from other cities, and who connect to a call every Friday to say Shabbat Shalom to each other over such a long distance. From all the Hillel case, I can say that it is a big honor for us to have this award. Hillel case and Hillel Ukraine in particular are experiencing the hardest time of their history. And we are so grateful to have that much support from our colleagues abroad, from AJC and from Green family, so that we know that we're not alone. It is extremely important to have a connection with international Jewish community in this tough time. Thank you.
Hillel Kharkiv, it was my first Hillel. It's a Hillel which was my second home when I was in the university. And this Hillel involved me in the Jewish community, and thanks to the Hillel Kharkiv, I am staying now in Kyiv, and I am the member of the Hillel family now. I was shocked when I saw the main hall that destroyed, that everything was destroyed there. We hope that the war will end soon, and then we will rebuild the Hillel from the zero. We hope that it would be the new chapter for the Jewish community in Ukraine. Thank you, AJC and Green family, for this award. Your attention is very important for us, for me especially now. From Hillel Kyiv, from Ukraine, with love and peace and great gratitude.
Before I begin, I want to express my gratitude to David Harris and to AJC, this entire community. My experience with all of you over the last 16 years as a board member of Access and AJC has been life-changing, and for that I'm very I just have so much gratitude. So thank you, David. Thank you, all of AJC. In America today, we are faced with the rise of extremism at both ends of the political spectrum. In this session, we'll take a look at the rise of the left-wing movement in the United States, which calls itself progressive and which presents particular challenges for many American Jews. Traditionally, a majority of American Jews have been sympathetic to social justice or progressive movements, including, but not limited to, racial issues, women's rights, and LGBTQ rights. Indeed, Jews have played an outsized frontline role in each of these efforts. But something is different today, and that is the subject of our discussion. What happens when the very movements that Jews instinctively seek to embrace demand a renunciation of Zionism, any identification with Israel, or even suppression of Jewish pride as the price of admission? We've seen how some groups, in the name of racial justice, embrace the BDS movement. We've seen how some women's marches have prevented Jews identified with Israel from participating. We've seen the same with LGBTQ demonstrations. And we've even seen some elected officials who claim to carry the flag of progressive values essentially call for Israel's demise, promote anti-Semitic tropes. There are right-wing elected officials who do the same, but that's a topic for a different day. So what are proud Jews and Zionists supposed to do when confronted with the clash between these core aspects of their identities and their deep-seated desire to support broader national causes with which they also seek to identify? With us today to discuss and hopefully resolve these dilemmas are three leading Jewish voices. David Baddiel is a comedian, author, screenwriter, and television presenter who wrote the poignant and timely book, Jews Don't Count. Rachel Fish, we can hold our applause till the end, welcome them all. Rachel Fish is the co-founder of the group Boundless and a longtime AJC friend, and Yair Rosenberg is a contributing writer at The Atlantic, where he writes the Deep Shtetl newsletter. Moderating our panel is Manya Brashear Pashman, host of AJC's podcast, People of the Pod. The panel discussion is a special live recording. This panel discussion is a special live recording of the podcast that will air later this week. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Yair, David, Rachel, and Manya for this week's episode of People of the Pod.
Good morning, or is it afternoon? I've lost track of time. I'm Manya Brashear Pashman, host of People of the Pod, AJC's weekly podcast about global affairs through a Jewish lens. And you, ladies and gentlemen, are about to be on that podcast because we are getting ready to record this week's show before a live studio audience. You. That means when you clap, our listeners will hear it. When you laugh, our listeners will hear it. And when the episode goes live later this week, you will be able to access it at ajc.org/podcast or on your phone, Apple, Google, wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with your friends. That's me cackling like a hyena in the front row. That would be me, at least. In just a moment, we are going to start recording. But before we do, let's do one trial run of applause. I'm going to count down and give you your cue at 3, 2, 1. Well done, well done. Here we go. Hello, and welcome to a very special live show of People of the Pod. Anti-Semitic rhetoric has grown at an alarming rate on college campuses and in so-called progressive spaces nationwide. Whether one supports the existence of Israel has become a litmus test for Jews who want to march for women's equality, LGBTQ rights, protecting our planet. Just last week, BDS activists in Boston published a map linking Jewish institutions, schools, houses of worship, even nonprofits that work to prevent homelessness and refugee resettlement with opposition, not to prevent it, but they settle refugees, with opposition to Palestinian human rights and white supremacy. Here to discuss this alienation of liberal Jews from progressive spaces are Yair Rosenberg, a writer for The Atlantic magazine, whose newsletter, Deep Shtetl, tackles these issues with wit and wisdom. I should also add, Yair has an album coming out in August. He's very multi-talented. Rachel Fish, co-founder of Boundless, not just a think tank, but a think action tank for education on Israel. And David Baddiel, comedian, screenwriter, television personality, and author of the book, Jews Don't Count. Welcome, friends. So I have to begin with a confession of my own. I was a religion reporter in Chicago for many years before I came to AJC, and I remember in 2017 when activists were turned away from the Chicago Dyke March because they were carrying rainbow flags with the Star of David. I remember getting calls from my sources at AJC, and I shrugged my shoulders. So some people got turned away from a rally. That's unfortunate. On to bigger news. I did not see a story there because I didn't know that this was part of a nationwide, if not worldwide, trend of excluding Jews from these so-called progressive spaces. I say so-called progressive spaces. I'm thinking back yesterday to Katharina von Schnurbeins' comments. She is, of course, the EU Commissioner for Combating Anti-Semitism. She pointed out that if anti-Semitism exists in these spaces, it indicates a lack of progress. So perhaps progressive is not a precise word. But I didn't see that this was bigger news. Yair, as a journalist who is on top of all of the trend lines, who explains these issues so well and puts them in context for readers, where else besides the LGBTQ space that I just mentioned, where else have you seen this happen?
So first, I just want to thank you for having me here, all of you for being here. It's my job to sit here and listen to people talk about anti-Semitism. I'm not entirely sure what all of you are doing. I'm only slightly alarmed. The question of Jews and inclusion in progressive spaces is a complicated one because there are the vast majority, this is a journalism question, the vast majority of progressive spaces don't exclude Jews. And as a result, no one writes any stories about them, just like nobody writes any stories about the planes that don't crash. Even though it's an incredible miracle that thousands upon thousands of airplanes take off every single day, no one writes a Pulitzer Prize-winning story about how that happens. Only the one plane that crashes, everybody can name what that is. And that's true about Jews who encounter anti-Semitism on college campuses, Jews who find exclusion in things like the Chicago Dyke March. This is definitely something that we've seen as a growing trend, where I would argue, and we can get to this later, that progressive groups are not actually living up to their own stated values of things like intersectionality, and not applying their own values to Jews. And then basically make the decision that Jews are all just writ large, privileged white folks who don't experience the world in much more unique and complicated ways. That's how I would understand it. I don't think that, I think it's important to put that context around it. Sometimes this gets put in a in a very large alarmist frame. But as, say, a person who goes and speaks on college campuses and talks to very diverse audiences about things like Israel, I've been waiting to be protested off of campus, but it just hasn't happened yet. Okay. Clearly, I'm doing something wrong. But I want to acknowledge those sorts of things. And then at the same time, and I think that's going to be the focus of this panel, I want to acknowledge the fact that sometimes Jews, especially Jews in like more activist or campus settings, will walk into a room and they'll get sort of carded, they'll get interrogated about their relationship to a state thousands of miles away that they're not a citizen of, and that they just happen to share religion with those people with. Now, if a Muslim walked into a space and the immediate reaction was to sort of interrogate them about their views about different groups in the Middle East, we would all hopefully understand that that was a form of bigotry. But we still see this sort of thing happening to Jewish people, and part of the task, I think, of Jewish people in these spaces and activists and writers and people who care about this issue is to explain to people how to apply their principles fairly and evenly so that Jews are included the same way as everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would actually disagree a little bit with Yair. I've been working on college campuses and with students for over 20 years. And I don't think that every campus is burning, but I think what Brett Stevens said earlier is that there is a reality that for some campuses, it is a 5-alarm fire. We know, for example, that it is not always just about Israel, right? Israel can be a lightning rod, but there are plenty of students who have nothing to do with Israel, don't know what their relationship is with Zionism, and yet they are asked to check their identity in terms of their Jewishness at the door. So we saw, for example, last summer, in the wake of May 2021 conflict between Israel and Hamas, student groups like Students Against Sexual Assault, nothing to do with politics of the Middle East. Now, these were student groups, not university administrators, but those student groups issued statements that clearly articulated that Jews had no place in these groups because, by default, they are supportive of the IDF, which engages in sexual assault against Palestinians. And therefore, these Jews are not welcome in these spaces, even if they themselves are victims of sexual assault, because of this perceived extension of association with Israeli behavior and Israeli action, which is blatantly false and a blood libel. Now, what do you do if you're that student? Well, I can tell you, I get calls from those students. The majority of those students desperately want to be accepted by the group, whatever it may be, whether it's LGBTQ+, whether it's Students Against Sexual Assault, whether it's feminist movements, whether it has to do with other minority communities. And they beg for a crumb to be accepted into that room. And I have to tell you, it's all of our jobs to actually tell them to stop begging. We need them to stand up, to stand extremely tall, and to have the moral courage to recognize that those organizations and individuals are engaging in clear hypocrisy and acts very often associated with anti-Semitism, and then they have to be called out for it. Now, I just want to say, because I am an academic, I'm a historian by training, there's real opportunity to call in. And the reason we have to call in is because the majority of individuals, especially 13 to 35 years of age, are what we call don't knows. Straight up don't knows. Because if you ask them, what is anti-Semitism? Yair has heard me say this. We did research. Most of them say, what's a Semite? Fair question. Then they also want to know, well, I'm anti-racist, I'm anti-Islamophobic, I'm anti-homophobic, so I'm probably an anti-Semite. Now we chuckle. We chuckle because we can, and we know what anti-Semitism is. But it's actually not a laughing matter. Because the younger you go, the more clear it is that they actually don't know what Jew hatred is. So we need to label it very clearly by calling it Jew hatred or hatred of Jews, and educate them and sensitize them around Judaism, Jews, the Jewish people, and the state of Israel.
So Rachel, I want to pick up on that. Is education the answer? I mean, in today's political climate, can Jews, can you be proudly Jewish? Can you be pro-Israel in a progressive liberal space?
Yes, but you might have to create your own organization and club.
Okay.
And you have to be okay doing so. But I want to just say one other thing, and then happy to hand it over to you, David, which is...
I think it's over. I think the whole thing is 25 minutes.
No, but I'll just say last thing, which is you have to be able to educate, but we're foolish if we think that education alone solves for this problem.
Yeah. Okay. David, I would like to turn to you. Your book, Jews Don't Count, doesn't necessarily deal with exclusion, but blatant anti-Semitism that we see from these so-called progressives who are self-proclaimed anti-racist. They've read the how-to books. They've read everything by Ibram X. Kendi. They're as woke as they can get. But as we devote ourselves to the fight against racism, anti-Semitism is often ignored. And I'm curious, how do we get across to anti-racists that anti-Semitism is a form of racism?
Well, that's at the core of my book. Just say, I sort of, in terms of the discussion so far, I sort of exist somewhere between the two. Yair is right that within the progressive space, anti-Semitism would be seen, and this is what my book is about, as a type of absence, a type of neglect. It has to be seen in the context of an intensification of identity politics, by which I mean concern for minorities, concern for allyship, concern from people who would define themselves as on the right side of history, as progressives, for all other minorities. And within that, one has to ask, why is anti-Semitism, why are Jews so low down in the mix? And it's quite hard to describe that in a way because you're describing something that isn't there. But I begin my book with about 12 examples of that, and the reason that I think it is dangerous is that I think it's very quick from those things to extreme forms of what you might call active anti-Semitism. So for example, just to use a New York example, okay? When my book came out, I was asked to write an op-ed for the New York Times about my book by a junior editor, I guess, there. And so I wrote it, and I think it was okay. And then she had to apparently ask someone further up at the New York Times whether or not this was going to run. And they didn't say anything about the article. They didn't say the article was terrible and badly written or whatever. They just said, I don't think this is what we should be focusing on at the present time. Right? So, and that's the attitude. The attitude is, it's not important. Anti-Semitism is not important. And the reasons it's not important, once you burrow down into it, is where the anti-Semitism kicks in. Because it's a notion that Jews are essentially powerful, privileged, white, which is very important. The notions of white, I see Jews as what I call Schrodinger's whites, by which I mean Jews are white or non-white, depending on the politics of the observer. So the far right have seen Jews as non-white for centuries, and obviously Hitler saw Jews as non-white. The Nuremberg laws were racial purity laws. But meanwhile, the progressives see Jews as kind of super white, right? They see Jews because of their notions of power and privilege. Whenever a Jew does anything, if a Jew does a bad thing, you'll see constantly that Jew referred to as a white man, normally a man, but as a white person. And there's no slack given to Jews for being Jews in that circumstance. So at the heart of this, to come back to your question, is Jews need to be included in what I call the sacred circle of minorities about whom these progressive people do care about. And one way you can possibly do that is by stressing that anti-Semitism is racism. And it's extraordinary how, particularly in this country, there is pushback against that. It's partly because racism is such a hallowed term now, and it's ring-fenced essentially mainly for the black community. And I know why the white American might feel that. But the truth is that, here's how I make it clear, I'm an atheist. I've been an atheist for years. That would not have given me any free passes out of Auschwitz. Right? My great-uncle, who died in the Warsaw Ghetto, was a secular Jew. As far as I know, he had no belief in God, but that he still died. It is totally... And now, white supremacists do not ask whether you keep kosher before they burn down your house, right? So it is racism because this is an indelible thing. I can't change it about me. It doesn't matter how I pray, and they are not interested. But you do get intense pushback against it. But essentially, in terms of the education that Rachel's talking about, you need to, the young people in particular, it is hard for them to understand what anti-Semitism is. So therefore, if you make it simple and say, well, it is an accident of birth for which you are discriminated against, just like people of certain skin color are, then perhaps you're moving them towards a simplicity of understanding, and they will get on side.
So you said that this is an American phenomenon, this hesitation.
In Britain, it's much more straightforward. You can talk about anti-Semitism being racism without there being much pushback. So here's a little scoop for you. I don't know if I should say it, I'm going to say it. So when Whoopi Goldberg did her thing, in which she basically said the Holocaust was not a racist thing, I was interviewed on British TV in a clip that went viral explaining why it utterly was a racist thing. The Holocaust was entirely a race-based thing. And by the way, it doesn't matter whether Jews are a race biologically or not. The point is, in history, we have been racialized. The racists have decided we are a race, and that is what counts if you're trying to counter racism. So I went on TV and explained this, and then the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, called me up and said, can you just run that past me again? And I did, and then they changed their definition of racism. And they said the next day that anti-Semitism was racism, something they'd been avoiding up to that point.
I do recall that. I do recall that switch. You also used a term Schroding. Can you unpack that?
Schrodinger. Schrodinger. Sorry, it's a science term. You've heard of Schrodinger's cat, right? No? Oh, sorry. Okay.
This will be fun to explain to a broad auditorium.
This is going to take an hour to explain.
But also just wonderful for the family audience.
Yeah. Schrodinger's cat is a scientific experiment that a physicist called Schrodinger did. He was trying to explain how quantum physics works, and basically he imagined a cat in a box, and it's got a poisonous thing in it. This is going to take too long. But basically, he imagined that before you open the box, you don't know if the cat is alive or dead, and quantum physics would say it is simultaneously alive or dead.
Okay.
So when I say Jews are Schrodinger's whites, I mean that Jews are simultaneously white or non-white, depending on the politics of the observer, which is the person who is deciding for us. It's not really up to us.
Right.
It's not really up to us how we identify as far as racists are concerned.
Right. That I get. I want to ask a question to all three of you. Based on your observations, your personal experiences, what are the consequences of silencing Jewish voices on progressive issues and ignoring the fact that anti-Semitism is a form of racism? I mean, do we opt out? You mentioned forming our own Jewish responses to these causes, or that being one of the less desirable options. Let me leave it at that. Let me pose that to all three of you.
I think that what's often overlooked in these discussions is that the exclusion of Jews and the centering of, say, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a sexual assault activism group, in an anti-racism group, in a minimum wage advocacy group, whatever you name the list, when you start deciding that an intractable conflict thousands of miles away is going to define who can and can't participate, you are going to splinter your own movement. You're going to get it bogged down in a whole bunch of controversies that have nothing to do with your core goal. If you're truly a mission-oriented organization, you should have that mission, and anyone who wants to sign up should be able to sign up. And this is not just true on Israel. I think we've noticed this in a lot of progressive groups across the board, and people who care about progressive values, this is starting to worry them, which is that they tend to break down over conflicts, over unrelated issues, because everyone is expected to buy in to 100 other litmus tests, none of which have anything to do with the progressive value that was purportedly being advanced. And if you care about that value, then you should care about those things. So you can say, what is the consequences for Jews, but what is the consequences for everyone else of doing something like this?
Right. Rachel?
I fully agree, and I would argue that it's about reclaiming. And sometimes you can't reclaim a particular organization because it has been hijacked and their human rights litmus tests have been manipulated for a particular political agenda. So when you can't reclaim it, and you know that these are values you care about, these are issues that you identify with, you have to then create. You don't cede the space. You have to create new organizations in those spaces. But you don't need an actual bureaucracy. You need a gang. You need one or two other people who feel like you do about that particular cause, who make it your mission in order to deal with that issue. Because focusing on the conflict or on something related to Israel is completely pushing the main focus aside And ultimately, it does a disservice. And it's not just to the Jews. It does a disservice for the larger population. And this is where I will say that what happens on campus doesn't stay on campus. Right? For 20 years, we were told by leaders in the Jewish community, and not from David Harris. David Harris was an exception, and I say that with all earnesty. But we heard, and I heard it from individuals, don't worry, you'll graduate. It's just a handful of professors. Don't worry, you'll get married. It'll be fine. You'll join a synagogue. And I was the one raising the flag with a couple of other folks who said, what happens on campus doesn't stay here. It's not Vegas, right? It goes beyond campus. And so we see that. We see it in mainstream politics, we see it in the media, and now we see it in social justice movements.
Mm-hmm. And I want to clarify, you're saying not coming up with a Jewish response, just a new response.
I'm saying if that group doesn't want me, then I don't want to be part of that group, but that doesn't mean I don't have a claim on addressing those particular issues because I care about those issues. That's not a Jewish response, that's a response to whatever the issue that I care about is focused on, environmentalism, LGBTQ+, minority issues, whatever it may be. But I'm willing to call out the absurdity of the hyper-focus on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Mm-hmm. And David, what is the consequence of silencing these voices, but also just ignoring the fact that anti-Semitism is racism, hesitating to equate the two?
Well, so I think I said earlier that this neglect feels like a passive thing, but it has, as I say, active consequences. So for example, when 11 Jews were massacred in Pittsburgh in 2018, within half an hour, a woman who sits in the House of Lords in Britain, who was a member of the Liberal Democrats, so therefore a progressive, and who in fact decided to support Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party at the time, within half an hour, she had put a Facebook post out saying, this is terrible, but when is anyone going to talk about what is happening in the Middle East at the moment? When is anyone going to realize that these events are linked to what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing? And of course, the person who killed those people was a right-wing, white supremacist terrorist, not in any way, not even interested in what's happening in the Middle East. But the assumption is, and the reason that I would tie that in to this passive neglect of anti-Semitism, is that stems from the same notion that Jews must be in some way too powerful to be victims. That's the sense. The Jews are too powerful and too privileged, and so therefore when bad things happen to them, they must be in some sense responsible, and the power must in some sense still lie with them. Mm-hmm. So I saw this again recently. So when the terrible killings happened in Buffalo, very recently there was a woman on The View, that discussion program, The View, and she tried to describe the Great Replacement Theory. The Great Replacement Theory being the thing that the Buffalo killer, who released a manifesto mainly about how much he hates Jews, why he did the things that he did. And in describing it, that woman misdescribed it. She said the Great Replacement Theory believes that a cabal of elites and Jewish people are frightened that they're going to be replaced by black and brown people. And that just happened on The View, and no one said, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. What the Great Replacement Theory believes is that white people, white supremacists, think that Jews are secretly manipulating immigration and multiculturalism in order to replace white people. Right. That's what it is. And as such, we are with black and brown people as targets for white supremacists. Mm-hmm. We are vulnerable because of the Great Replacement Theory. Right. I almost got a round of applause when people weren't sure. That's fine. But the point is the same. Maybe that was a subconscious slip, but it's the same thing. It's an inability to put Jews in the arena of the vulnerable, despite history. Mm-hmm. It's incredible.
Well, certainly AJC has worked very hard to educate people on Great Replacement Theory, these kinds of conspiracy theories that define and characterize anti-Semitism. And I know that I should have probably listened to those AJC sources a little bit more closely when I was covering religion in Chicago, and I'm so grateful to all of you for joining us here today. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You good? Thank you.
It's so special to see all of us here today, happily reuniting and eagerly recommitting to the critical advocacy work of AJC's global agenda.
The United States is committed to working by your side to tackle the alarming rise in anti-Semitism around the world.
Isn't enough enough? Isn't it time we stand up and say no more?
Я знаю, що ваша допомога вже суттєва, але ви можете використати ще більше свого впливу.
There is a need for denazification today, ladies and gentlemen. It's in Moscow, not in Kiev. The biggest weakness right now is the West is still funding Mr. Putin's war effort.
In progressive spaces, we're being asked to leave, and we are leaving in record numbers.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Well, friends, we all know what happens now. We've arrived at that traditional closing GloFo moment that we eagerly anticipate every year. Our CEO's reflections and his embedded call to action, which sends us back to our communities, energized, enthused, and of course, inspired. This year, it's going to be a little bit different. It'll be a little bit different in part because in lieu of a speech from this podium, David has instead asked to be interviewed by two bright young Jewish stars, Dina Fish and Abe Baker Butler. But of course, the real difference is that today our advocate-in-chief and our friend, David Harris, will deliver his final remarks at the Global Forum as the Chief Executive Officer of the American Jewish Committee. Now, even as I say these words, I have to pause for just a moment to reflect on that moment, given how long I, and in truth my father before me, and like so many of you out there, have enjoyed and experienced the joy and the privilege of having worked with David. Now, here's the good news. As has been evident through this global forum, the future of AJC and, of course, of the global Jewish community is strong, it remains bright, and this, of course, is in large part to David's remarkable leadership over our organization for the last 32 years. And as we all know, even though, and as Linda noted earlier, even though this may be David's Global Forum swan song, he will, of course, remain at the helm of AJC, fully engaged as ever, for another 3.5 months until that moment where he passes that baton to Ted Deutch, whom, as we now all know and understand, will unquestionably take us from strength to strength. And here's the other good news. For those of us, and I'm sure most of us fall in this category, who were present here last night to bear witness to that remarkable tribute to David, the one that culminated in David's uttering words that we thought we would never hear, that he was almost rendered speechless. And rightly so, given the eloquence and the warmth and the good humor of those tributes. I have it on good authority that David will not be speechless today as he sits for this special interview. And so without further ado, I have the distinct honor and privilege of asking you to please join me in welcoming not only Dina and Abe, but one more time to the Global Forum stage, the visionary of AJC's global advocacy, our esteemed CEO, and someone for whom our respect and our admiration is outdistanced only by our affection, our friend, David Harris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bobby. It was great. Thank you. Well, thank you, Bobby, and hello, everyone. David, thank you for being here with Dina and I.
Hi, Dina.
Hey.
So, David, Dina and I have had the immense pleasure and honor
of getting to learn and grow from you as advocates, as Jewish leaders, as young people. And we'd like to share those insights with the Global Forum audience through this Q&A with you. So with that, I'll start with the first question. Every day, you live, through your example, what it means to be Jewish and proud. How has the meaning of being Jewish to you changed over the course of your truly remarkable AJC career?
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. And I want to be sure you understand why there's this format. As Bobby said, I asked for this format because I've heard the expression Lador Vador pretty much all my adult life, and I didn't want it just to become a cliche. I wanted this to be the last moment, Lador Vador. And I couldn't think of two brighter, more dedicated people with more potential and promise for the Jewish people than Dina Fish, graduate of Brandeis University, and as she describes herself on her Twitter account,
a Zionist.
Hockey fan. Oh, and by the way, proud Zionist. And A. Baker Butler, who worked with us for a year between high school and college, and who just finished his freshman year at Yale. And I can go on about Abe for quite some time, but that's not what he asked me. I hinted at the answer in a way last night, Abe. I went from, in some respects, being an external Jew to an internal Jew. My earlier Jewish identity was largely based on externalities. Because of my family story, I hated those who hated us. And I built my identity around that. And that included my response to the Soviet Jewry challenge, because there was a tyranny that hated Jews and wanted to continue the process, in this case of cultural genocide, so I had to oppose them, as my parents' generation had opposed the Nazis. It was only later, again, I said this last night, that I understood that it's much healthier to build an identity inside out than outside in. And I said last night that I had been robbed. I had been robbed by a weak Hebrew school system, maybe by the temptation of sports and other after-school activities. My parents knew very little about Jewish content. I did not go to my first Shabbat dinner until after graduate school. And when I went to that first Shabbat dinner, which Steve and Nita was in Harrison, New York, I had no clue what was going on. I tried to mouth words that I didn't know as they said the prayers and sang the songs. That's how Jewishly illiterate I was, Abe. And that changed because of Soviet Jews. Because when I was in Rome and Vienna, some would ask me questions, basic questions, like what's this next holiday, or what's Shabbat? Now the difference is they had a good reason for not knowing. They had just come out of the Soviet Union, which made a very deliberate effort to deny them that knowledge and practice. What was my excuse? So I actually, in a pre-Google era, which is hard to imagine probably for the two of you, I had to do it the old-fashioned way, and I called my mother in New York. Another old-fashioned reference, I called her Collect. And I said, Mommy, I'm kind of stuck here. I'm being asked all these questions about being Jewish. I don't have answers, and at the time my Italian wasn't good enough. Can you send me some books? So I began studying Judaism and, if you will, Jewish history to stay a step ahead of the questions I knew were coming from Soviet Jews. And that's when I discovered, as I said, that I'd been robbed, and began this lifelong quest to become, if you will, a more rounded, more knowledgeable Jew.
Hi, David.
Hi, Dina.
So after a lifetime of advocating for Jews, both at home and abroad, a key issue for AJC, what would you say is the most significant shift? And are Jews safer today than when you first started your career at AJC?
Well, now you're going to pull me into the Bret Stephens debate.
Sorry.
I've always come to believe that we need to be bifocal Jews. We need to understand that at one and the same time, we're dealing with contradictory information and contradictory trends. So we cannot be, if you will, monofocal Jews, meaning, sure, Dina, it's all better and get a good night's sleep, which is what I would love to say. In fact, I'll go a step further. When the Jews can get a good night's sleep, that will be an inflection point in history. And I mean that quite seriously. We're not quite there yet. So I think we have to learn how to deal with the contradictions inherent in Jewish life today. I can easily argue that we are the most privileged, fortunate Jewish generation in the history of the Jewish people. It's pretty obvious to me. We're blessed with the sovereign state of Israel. It's a success story. You heard the numbers with respect to Jewish life in America. Compare it, I'll put it differently to the audience. Is there any year in history that anyone in this room would rather return to than the year 2022? I can't think of one. So in that respect, we're lucky. Hallelujah. But that has to coexist with an opposite trend, and we have to learn to kind of live nimbly. And that's, I think, in a way, as part of the Lador Vador story, that's what I think your generation has to come to understand. Brett said it rather dramatically, but history is not necessarily a linear force. It doesn't simply go along a straight line from A to B to C. History can reverse course. History can change course. And Lord knows that Jews are usually among the first to sense it and to grasp that when history changes course, there are likely to be implications for us. So, I've taken the view, as some of you know who write to me, in the middle of the night and get an answer. I've sort of glibly said that sleep is overrated. Or now that I'm a more well-rounded Jew, I can quote Psalm 121. The guardian of Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. I've taken it perhaps too literally. But don't, Dina and Abe, ever ignore that message in Psalm 121, even as you savor all of the fruits of Jewish life in the year 2022.
Thank you, David. Now, another weighty question. I'd like to ask you about interests and values. As the Jewish people, we have such rich values, but what do we do when our interests and our values conflict? How have you dealt with interests and values? What have you done when they've conflicted during your long career at AJC?
Well, in a way, to first depersonalize this, Abe, we have this illustration before our very eyes today with President Joe Biden. To take a timely moment. This morning, I think at 8 o'clock, the White House announced that he's going to Saudi Arabia. Now, review President Biden's comments with respect to Saudi Arabia in the last couple of years, particularly after the murder of the journalist, and more broadly, his comments on human rights questions. And ask yourself if this trip is a change of US policy with respect to Saudi Arabia, and I would argue it's obviously a change of policy. By the way, I would also argue it's the right change of policy. Or take the issue of the energy crisis as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Was it the right decision of Germany under Angela Merkel and under pressure from the Green Party to eliminate all peaceful nuclear reactors in Germany? By the way, while France was building additional ones. President Biden has now asked OPEC countries to increase oil production, even though his party presented a platform that looked to a post-fossil fuel world, including the elimination of pipelines under construction in our country today. What am I saying, Abe? That purity and pragmatism often collide. And in our world, I believe we need nimble pragmatists who don't leave values behind, but who understand that when there is this immovable force of two powers in equal and opposite directions, being a purist is unlikely to be the right response. So we've had lots of clashes at AJC over the years, and time permitting, I can go through case studies. I think one of the most obvious for me and one of the most difficult was the Armenian genocide question. Now, in and of itself, it should be a simple question. There was a genocide. It's been documented by too many people to pretend otherwise, notwithstanding Turkish propaganda. But I'm going back now 15, 20 years. The Turkish government was prepared to punish any institution or any country that openly spoke about the genocide. And in the case of us, AJC, we were quite explicitly told there will be damage to the Jewish community of Turkey. The Turkish border, which had been used by escaping refugees, Jewish refugees from a neighboring country to the east, visualize the border, will be shut down. And we will obligate the Turkish Jewish community to sever its association agreement with AJC. That was the reality we faced. And there was a direct clash between our values. We, the victims of genocide, were going to deny a previous victim of genocide of their sense of self and history. On the other hand, would we bear the responsibility for the consequences if the Jewish community of Turkey would be punished? And who knew in what ways? So these are very difficult issues in the real world, Abe. I don't want to speak about what happened in what we used to call a skull session at Yale or Brandeis. But in the real world, to me, the nimbleness of being a centrist is it allows you to emerge from these kind of rigid uniforms that people put on in the morning and are unwilling or even unable to take off during the day.
Thank you. Dina.
So David, I've been working at AJC for 4 years now, so almost as long as you. But in a room filled with AJC supporters and AJC employees, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your AJC journey. So what has been your favorite part about working at AJC? What has been the most challenging part? And what is the most important lesson you've learned as the CEO?
Whew.
Easy questions, I know.
I can honestly say, and our world is filled with happy talk, the assumption that tell the audience what it wants to hear. But I can honestly say, Dina, and I think my wife said it in her own way yesterday, and wow, was I proud of my wife last night. A speaker is born. But my wife, I think, more or less said it. I'm the luckiest person in the world. I never had a job. I never went to a job. My job was my life, my mission, my passion, my calling. Someone paid me to do this? Well, now that I'm close to the finish line, I'll tell Rick Hine and Frank Lindy and David Burrs, our financial team, a secret. I would have paid AJC for this job. That's the God's honest truth. I wouldn't have paid you a whole lot. No other source of income. But I was a kid in the candy store from day one until today, and I intend for that to be the case until close of business on September 30th. The challenge, there have been many. I think the biggest challenge, again, was expressed by Steve Boehm and perhaps others yesterday. The organization that I, if you will, inherited in September 1990 was on the brink of closing its doors forever. This was the perspective of some of the media who wrote about it. So and this is no false modesty, I said last night, I ran away from the job. Sholem Kome was chasing after me. I did not want this job. I wanted to stay in Potomac, Maryland, in that idyllic place where we were raising our family and we were very happy. But when I accepted the job, what did I find? The organization was very close to bankruptcy. The organization was suffering from incredible mission creep. There were exceptional, and Bobby, you'll know this from your dad, exceptional lay tensions, staff tensions, and then lay staff tensions. And an outsider looking at AJC and asking, what's the purpose of this organization today, would have been hard-pressed to find the answer. I had zero management experience. I could not read a balance sheet. I had never raised $5 for AJC. That's the gift Sholem Kome gave me. So the challenge was trying to reimagine an organization on the one hand, but the reimagination is actually the easier part, in a way. It's the actualization of the vision that's the hard part, because you can visualize on your own. I can run around the reservoir in Central Park and visualize in the morning, and then try and navigate around my wife's aversion to sweat and need for coffee. So for me, that's the fun part. I love that. The hard part is the realization that the actualization requires a team. Alone, it's impossible. So how do you engage a team? How do you motivate a team? How do you build a team? How do you rebuild a team in order to take the visualization to the next stage of actualization? That was the challenge, Dina. It turned out to be a very happy story, but it wasn't a simple overnight story.
So David, unfortunately we're running a little low on time, but we have just a few more questions to ask you.
I have 41 more years to cover. But remember, this story began in 1979. It was 11 years later that the transition occurred for me. So
here's a question. When I was working for you, I had the chance to see firsthand how you wake up at 4 a.m., sometimes when I'm going to bed.
Wait, that's true.
Yes. You respond to emails within 5 minutes, if not less. You've maintained intense, unwaning motivation over 50 years. And my question is simply, how? What advice do you have for our audience here today?
Well, the how is the second question, Abe. It's the why that precedes it. And if you can satisfactorily answer the why, and in my case, I don't think I need to repeat for this audience the why, the how follows the why. So, as my wife and children will attest, the word vacation has been deleted from our vocabulary. I've not taken a single sick day at AJC in 32 years. I had to have a couple of minor surgeries on my eye and my knee, but that was it. I've not taken a single sick day. As I said earlier, it's not because I'm some kind of martyred figure. It's because I love what I do, and I don't know how to separate myself from what I do. So when I hire Abe, and this is for the young people, who can be defined as anyone born up to September 22nd, 1949. So it does not include Bruce Springsteen, because he and I share the same birthday by the way. What I'm looking for in a job interview is the P word. What's the P word? Passion. I'm passionate about what I do. I believe in what I do. I care about what I do. I'm looking for people who are not looking for a job, but looking for a mission. And once that fits into place, if we don't have full control over our health, as we all know, Abe. I've been lucky until now. I've also had an extraordinarily supportive family, as you saw last night. So why sleep at 4 in the morning when you can be reading what Abe Baker Butler is writing to you about? much more fun.
Thank you.
Now, you have another question, Dina?
But I defer to you.
Yes. No. I want to turn the tables for a moment because I'm approaching the finish line, but you're close to the starting line. So I'm going to turn the tables. Dina, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the Jewish future? And whatever your answer is, why?
Well, you lobbed me an easy one. I appreciate it.
Revenge.
It's a mixed bag. As you always say, it's important to be swivel-headed and to look at all aspects of the playing field and to be cognizant of the things that are in the past, present, and future. And I think that working at AJC, and a big shout out to my global communications colleagues who have shown me the passion and shown me the drive. And we look at the good and the bad, and we make sure that every single day, if there's an opportunity to highlight Jewish pride and Jewish peoplehood and the amazing things that the state of Israel is doing, that we do that. And that we also take a moment to recognize when there are real and present challenges, and we make sure to only call out the real and present challenges, not to belittle those, not to use the term anti-Semitism lightly. I think having the opportunity to work at AJC makes me so optimistic as a young American Jew. It gives me such hope in the state of Israel, and seeing the wonderful messages that we saw from our Israeli colleagues and from the Israeli government. I mean, there's a lot of Jewish pride in Israel, and there's a lot of proud Zionists in this room. So I'm personally very optimistic.
Great. Abe, where do you fall on the spectrum, optimism, pessimism, as a Jew?
Well, I could do a tevya, and the one hand, the other hand. I think I fall very similarly to Dina. The challenges are huge, as we just heard in the great debate, but I'm very optimistic, and that's in no small part because of the peers I've had the chance to meet and work with through the Leaders for Tomorrow program, through AJC in general. I mean, this community of activists and leaders gives me hope. And then Israel is another reason. Israel is the realization of a historic dream, and we're experiencing that now. It's a realization that is continuing, but I don't know how I could not be optimistic when we have that and when we have such passionate, intelligent, driven, principled young leaders among us. So that's what gives me hope despite the many challenges we're facing.
Back to you.
Thanks, David. So thinking of the world your grandchildren are going to grow up in, and by the way, I just have to say, they are adorable.
They really are.
I guess we're pivoting the question back to you. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the Jewish future? And what can we, Abe and I, and the other young advocates in this room be doing to ensure a brighter and more positive future for Jewish children in America?
I think what you not only can be doing, Dina, but must be doing is believing in the possibility of a brighter future. Let me illustrate. I entered college in 1966. Dial back, 1966. Israel was 18 years old, and within 1 year was going to be threatened with a war of annihilation in a country whose narrowest border was 9 miles wide. As George Bush famously said, there are some driveways in Texas that are longer than Israel is wide. And there were predictions galore that whether it was because of outside threats or internal divisions, Israel could not survive. No water, no natural resources, Ashkenazi Sephardic splits, Jewish Arab splits, external threats, put it all together. In 1966, several million Jews were trapped in the Soviet Union with no hope of leaving. None. The word emigration, emigratia, did not exist in the Russian vocabulary. In 1966, no Ivy League university in the United States had ever had a Jewish president. And I'm not sure exactly what year, but I think it was a few years later that Irving Shapiro became the first CEO of a Fortune 500 company in the United States who was a Jew. The idea in 1966 that there would ever be an African American president in the United States, a female president, a serious Jewish candidate, a serious LGBTQ candidate, was completely beyond comprehension. And when I came on campus, the dominant culture was a word that is almost lost in the English language today. WASP. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Now, you may say, and I would agree with you at your stage of life, that, well, that was 55 years ago, and wow, David, 55 years is a hell of a long time to wait for change. I would say in the sweep of recorded history, 55 years is a flash in the pan. So fast forward from 1966 and now 2022. Do I have to even fill in the blanks? Israel is one of the world's great success stories. Not only able to defend itself, but whose population is growing and whose role as a 21st century problem solver puts it among the top 5 countries in the world, I believe, when it comes to the challenges of this century. Do I have to keep going? Where's the Soviet Union today? Most of you don't speak Russian, but there are a few of you who do. The Soviet Union was called Sovietsky Soyuz in Russian. My favorite word in the Russian language today is bывший. Who speaks Russian? What does bывший mean? former, as in former Soviet Union. 1 million plus Jews have settled in Israel. How many have settled here? And in the 15 successor republics of the Soviet Union, Jewish life has been reborn. The efforts of the Nazis and the efforts of the Stalins failed. Look at our politics today in terms of diversity. Okay, we still have a ways to go. And we're at a stage where if there's not a Jewish university president in an Ivy League institution, we ask what happened to that institution. Because so many of the others are led. And the Fortune 500, people in the business world know better than I. Believe in the possibility of change, not because it's some abstract notion, but because it's happened on the watch of many of the people in this room. And never stop believing. And my final thought. In 1969, Sam Klieger will correct me, 19 families from Soviet Georgia wrote a letter to the United Nations. And the essential message of the letter was, Shelach et ami. Let my people go. They took on the greatest totalitarian nation on earth. On earth. And they paid a price for it, but ultimately those 19 families prevailed. We don't have the power of the state, but we have the power of faith and resilience that led those 19 families to say, we're Jews. You're not going to deny us our identity, and if you're not going to allow us to live here, we're determined to leave and start a new life. Dean and Abe, that's the kind of thinking we need. And then the gift is, you're not alone. You have this platform, AJC, which has not just been a witness to history, it's been an author of history. So don't ever allow AJC and don't ever allow others to become prisoners of history or bystanders of history or observers of history. What Israel has taught us, take history into your own hands and chart our own destiny, and don't allow others to do it for us.
So David, you touched on this a little bit, but I've seen you put your nonpartisanship into practice. It is a true gift. And I'd like to know what you think about the importance of nonpartisanship for younger generations.
I'm laughing because to be a nonpartisan today is to be somewhere between a dinosaur and a pariah in America. Abe, I think it all depends what the starting point is. If the starting point is doctrine and ideology, then be a partisan. But I quickly learned from that angry generation of the late 60s, which was very partisan and very doctrinal, that I had higher priorities which I wasn't aware of then. And they came into focus during the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Because what happened? What happened was that after the heyday of the Six-Day War, many thought Israel was invincible, only to be caught by surprise, face an extended war, be unprepared for the supply chain of that war, and need to rely on one country and one country alone for the possibility of replenishing weapons and weapon systems and spare parts. And which country was that, Abe?
That it relied on? United States.
And who was the president of the United States in 1973? Richard Nixon. How many Jews had voted for Richard Nixon? versus how many Jews have been out in the streets calling for his removal, defeat, conviction. But the fate of the state of Israel in October 1973 depended on Richard Nixon, the Nixon White House. No, it didn't depend on Henry Kissinger. It depended on Richard Nixon. And that's where I had my lifelong lesson in nonpartisanship, Abe. Because I discovered in that moment I cared more about Israel than I cared about the uniform my friends were wearing, the political, ideological uniform they were wearing. And that's where the clash between purity and pragmatism also came into play. I hated Richard Nixon, perhaps, but I needed Richard Nixon. I'm not saying this because I had a direct line to Richard Nixon. I did not. But that was my lesson. And that was followed by a second lesson. I cared about the well-being and fate of Soviet Jewry, and I knew there was only one country in the world outside the Soviet Union that could influence Soviet behavior, and that was this country. So I knew that if I wanted to help defend Israel's survival and security, or help rescue Jews in the Soviet Union, I need to be able to engage with whoever was in the White House and whoever dominated the Congress. It's as simple as that, Abe. And I also understood, sure, I have other views on other issues, and I'll go into the voting booth, close the curtain, and vote according to my larger Weltanschauung view of the world. But I wanted to spend my life in this space because I understood it mattered. And one last thing some of you may know, I think many of you don't. My first reaction in the Yom Kippur War was to volunteer for the IDF. Now, this was someone who had quietly marched in many protests against the Vietnam War. And I hope in a rare display of immodesty, you'll allow me to say that I helped Israel defeat its Arab enemies. And the reason was because Israel denied my application to serve in the IDF. Believe me, if I had no management skills in 1990 for this job, I probably had even fewer military skills in 1973 to offer. But that's when I learned another lesson, which applies here. This is the vital country in the link. I have nothing against many other countries in the world represented here. But to the extent that any country other than Israel itself can determine the destiny, the fate, the well-being, the safety and security of Israel, it's this one. It's this one. The role of this country is completely irreplaceable. I'll simplify it. One U.S. ambassador to the UN Security Council will either raise her or his hand or not. If there is a resolution introduced that would be legally binding, and the Security Council has that power, and injurious to the state of Israel, for example, calling for a global boycott of the state of Israel, or a global boycott of weapon sales to the state of Israel. There are 5 fingers that stand between that possibility and where we are today. And we've said for years, I've said for years, don't fall asleep. There are forces in America who understand exactly what I've said about this for years and who are determined to ensure that that hand does not go up, that it stays down. The job of AJC going forward, I believe, is to make sure that whoever's in the White House, and we have very limited control, and whoever runs the Congress, stands with Israel in those decisive moments. You want to debate settlement policy? Please. But when it comes to life and death issues, and the Security Council has that power, It's one country. And it's not going to be China. And it's not going to be Russia. And I highly doubt it's going to be France. And I highly doubt that if the United States keeps its hands down, that Britain would stand alone, especially if it's led by a Jeremy Corbyn-like figure. That's your job. That's AJC's job, to ensure that that hand never stays on the table.
Thank you, David. It's been truly wonderful having the chance to speak with you in front of this global audience. And we'd now like to offer you the opportunity to share some closing thoughts with the global audience.
How many hours? Well, very simple. I would be completely remiss if I didn't immediately mention 5 names. Bel Yoeli, Gillian Laskowitz, Leslie Cleon, Daniel Silver, and Claire Bailey. Now, because I know them quite well, they will all reprimand me afterwards for not emphasizing the team effort, because it wasn't a larger team effort to pull this all together, obviously. But every team has captains. These are the 5 captains that created an entirely new playbook. And by the way, next year we'll create an entirely new playbook again, because Lishana Haba'ah B'Tel Aviv. And follow Bob Grease's example and bring 14 family members. So my very last thought, because we're family. The hardest thing for me in the last few years actually did not emanate from the daily work here. It emanated shortly after the shooting in Poway, the Chabad synagogue. And as you heard from Danny, our oldest son, one of my great pleasures in life is taking his children, who live closest to us, walking distance, a couple of days a week to school. And at the time, Mila, I guess was probably 3, Danny, and she was at the Chabad nursery school on the east side. And she would always park herself on my shoulders, as she did last night. Again. And this time, as we approached that Chabad school on East 77th Street, this little beautiful 3-year-old girl sensed there was something different. There were police, there were more security guards. And she said to me, "Papi, what's happening?" I never in my life visualized having to grapple with an issue from my 3-year-old granddaughter on East 77th Street in this city, triggered by a deadly hate attack across the nation. But Chabad was presumably a legitimate target, as were other Jewish sites. And I want to paraphrase my wife's very last sentence, which she said through tears, and I'm not sure I'll be able to say it without the tears. Don't let any 3-year-old Jewish child ever have to ask that question. That's the job of AJC. You have lots of other jobs, but when it's crunch time, it's that 3-year-old Jewish child and her right to go to the nursery school of her parents and family's choosing, and to be the person she wishes to be, just as it's the right of Israel, as the sovereign expression of our quest to return after nearly 1,900 years of exile. 75 generations of Jews saying next year in Jerusalem, Don't ever force them to say that again. Not in the geographic sense, the metaphysical sense, something else. That's the essential job of AJC, I believe. The rest is obviously important, it's daily, it's timely, but at the end of the day, let's focus on the core mission. The core mission are our 3-year-old Jewish children living in places like New York and other cities, and our core mission is to make sure that that American hand never comes down, and the President of the United States, whatever the party may be, will never refuse the needs of an Israel at war. That's the ultimate mission of AJC, and I hope that will never, ever be in doubt, because my family, as my wife said, our 4, soon-to-be 6 grandchildren entirely depend on you. No longer on me, on you. That's your job.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.